What if the way we treat animals isn't just a moral issue, but a feminist one? What if the same structures that shape gender, race, and power also shape how we decide whose lives matter? Welcome to another episode of What the Feminism. Today's episode is part one of a two-part series where we explore animal ethics and feminism. Recently, I sat down with Dr. Jennifer Everett, one of my philosophy professors here at DePaul, and genuinely one of my favorite people to talk to. And if you are a DePaul student, seriously, take her classes. We started our conversation by talking about how she first found her way into animal ethics, the moment that opened this whole field up for her. I was wondering, how did you first get into animal ethics? And was there a particular thinker, text, or experience that shaped your perspective?
Yeah, I love it. Very similar to your story, except later, not in high school, which was not a place where I learned very much about thinking. But in college, I had a great interest in environmental issues. I wanted to take a course called Environmental Ethics when I saw it. I thought, wow, that sounds great. But it had a prerequisite to take ethical theory, or what was there called Introduction to Ethics. And in that course, we read a text by James Rachel's called Foundations of Ethics or something like that. It was the most common intro to ethics text at the time, really dominated the market. And the topic wasn't vegetarianism or factory farming. It was just a little coverage of learned helplessness experiments on puppies. Have you heard about those?
I haven't actually.
Okay, so they a lot of psychology has a kind of
Yeah,
dark history with animal experimentation. So these were experiments where you would get puppies to jump over a barrier of some kind, and then you would start shocking them when they land.
Oh,
and then you would
right.
shock. So yeah, this is familiar. All right. Well, so the upshot of the story in the text is like, did we really learn something of enough significance to outweigh the suffering that was caused in these experiments? And that was the first. I mean, I had animals around me, but that was my first sort of exposure to thinking about it in the context of philosophy and ethics. And that was a straightforwardly kind of utilitarian way of thinking about. So similar, right? Utilitarian kinds of approaches, animal suffering, learning that it exists, learning about the extent of it. Factory farming education came kind of quickly after that.
But ethics is more than just a math problem, and that's where our conversation starts shifting. This is where feminist philosophy becomes crucial. Traditional ethics, especially in the 70s and 80s, often tried to remove emotion and relationships, treating morality as something purely rational. But feminist thinkers argued that care, empathy, and connection are not distractions. They are part of what morality is. And in animal ethics, this matters a lot. Because the way we care for our own pets or feel shocked by cruelty, this isn't just sentimentality, it's ethical information. It tells us something is real. Professor Everett pointed to scholars like Lori Gruen, whose idea of entangled empathy pushes us to acknowledge how deeply interconnected we already are with non human beings.
Lori Gruen and I went to the same graduate program. She's brilliant. And so she just has this wonderful gravitas about her, and has worked with Peter Singer and has been involved in chimpanzee liberation effectively. And her work is really about challenging, I would say, the dominance of the kind of rationalistic paradigm in ethics
Mm-hmm.
that really is represented kind of by Singer and Reagan, these the rights view and the utilitarian view.
Yeah.
And so to me, this is about deepening our understanding of what ethics is.
Yeah.
So utilitarianism and rights frameworks are absolutely essential to understand, and they just don't exhaust what ethics is. Early works by those two figures, in particular Reagan and Singer, were very explicitly kind of anti emotion, right? Singer has his bit where he says, I don't love animals. I'm not doing this because I love animals. It's that reason demands this.
Yeah.
He's not wrong. Reason does demand it. But that's just not all there is to ethics. And so Gruen's book, Entangled Empathy, is, I think, has had a big splash, has had a big impact on making us think more complexly about ethics.
From there, our conversation moved into one of the biggest questions in animal ethics. Which beings count morally and why? A lot of people draw lines based on intelligence or similarity to humans. Primates count. Fish or insects maybe don't. But this selective empathy says a lot more about us than about them. Professor Everett argues that moral value doesn't come in neat categories. Suffering varies. Consciousness varies. But life itself, the experience of being a living organism navigating the world, has value.
So moral status is an interesting starting point, right? That it's sort of framed often in the literature like the question is how equal or unequal are we relative to other species? And right, so primates, they're mentally equivalent to a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, whatever. Which primates and so on. I think that you have to ask those questions, but you can't stop at those questions. So I'm relatively persuaded by the Singer argument that suffering is suffering regardless of the species of the individual who suffers. But the qualia, the qualitative experience of that suffering, that's got to vary tremendously. And so from some objective view from nowhere, like suffering is bad, independent of the race, gender, species, and so on of the sufferer. And the intensity of the suffering is what makes it bad. But that is like one dimension of the moral picture. And so I think for sure, and you're right, this is work that comes from women and other underrepresented, marginalized thinkers most often. Relationships are also part of morality and an important part of morality. And so it's not just that it's bad if your cat suffers, but it's your cat. And so, right?
Belonging, definitely,
So our moral obligations are a much more complex matter than the question of what's bad and how bad is it.
One of the most striking parts of the interview was when she talked about how gendered power structures inevitably shape human-animal relationships. Patriarchy influences everything: institutions, labor, economics, and of course, reproduction. The way animals are bred, controlled, and used are not separate from the ways gender operates in society. And her reflections made that connection feel obvious. It's actually the intersectional part that really makes me question the hierarchical structures in our own society. And as I think about how humans dominate other humans, and they continue to do, and they did a lot so in past, I wonder, do patriarchal structures influence human domination over animals? And how vast is that?
How vast is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, to me, whenever this question comes up,
Mm.
there can be for listeners
Yeah.
probably a kind of like, well, what is going to be the connection? They seem so some stretch of reasoning, and we're going to have to talk about like Carol Adams' work on
Yeah.
sexist language and so on, that we use language of animals for women and people of color, and we use like humanizing language when we want to talk about men. And I just think it's a lot simpler. Gender is part of everything.
Yeah.
Is part of everything, and gender is still, and not inevitably forever, but still and historically deeply hierarchical. So
Oh, definitely.
that, in a way, it's just a more general explanation of things. How could patriarchy not? Does economics affect our treatment of animals and the environment? Duh, obviously. Is there a sort of way in which our economic structures are gendered? Yeah, kind of, duh, obviously. So then it's just kind of a matter of unpacking those things. Like, well, what do we do? Like down in the nitty gritty when we say breed animals for meat consumption or for animal testing and so on. How is that exercise done?
Towards the end, I asked a question I had been thinking about a long time. How much of our diet is actually cultural? Why do some societies treat animals as food and others as companions? And could things have developed differently? Her answer reminded me that culture isn't something floating above politics or economics. What we eat is shaped by global systems, agriculture, trade, colonial histories, but it's also shaped by the simple fact of what we grew up seeing as quote unquote normal.
We have, in your question, we also have the presence of the global economic system.
Yeah.
And this sort of pressure for intensification of agriculture globally.
Yeah.
That is driven by all the economic structures that we could talk about politically.
Yeah.
And so culture, as apart from economics and politics, as if there was such a thing, is sort of hard to isolate. What I'm more familiar with when I think about culture and food is recipes. Just it's at the level of, like, what food did you grow up eating, and how, what we take to be food and not food is so culturally determined and really so variable. So, when I was in Ecuador, I remember being on a hike, and we met up with some cacao harvesters, and they were having lunch, and their lunch was these cooked grubs.
Okay.
And many people, I mean, this is a great place to talk about this, these intercultural experiences where different foods are taken to be normal and whatever. And so they're offered, and I ate moose when I was offered this by Alaska Native people. I ate grubs in Ecuador, and like, these are places where insisting on your way of doing things is kind of impolite, right?
Yeah.
So that, I don't know, like, what if I was in a place where cat and dog are on the menu? How would I
react to that?
Right? That might be harder. That might be a lot harder. But that's often, culture is raised as an objection to vegetarianism, right? It's like, to change my diet would be to change who I am, and I want to honor who my people are and my history, which often is a history of resistance. And I'm very sympathetic to that.
Yeah.
At the same time, usually every culture has some significant variation within it, and so there are vegans in every culture.
Yeah.
There's no culture that you defy if you decide that you care about animals.
That makes a lot of sense.
Although, it can be trickier. What if your culture is a whaling culture? What if your culture is subsistence hunters?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The problem is that far too often people whose culture is McDonald's and Taco Bell want to appeal to these cases of, well, what about somebody who's an indigenous Alaskan and depends on...
This was part 1. I'm very grateful to Professor Everett. Every time I talk to her, I walk away seeing something I'd missed before. Some assumption, some pattern, or some connection I hadn't identified yet. And honestly, that's what I hope these episodes do for you too. Part 2 will go even deeper, so stay tuned. As always, our socials are down below, and I've also referenced a lot of useful links and articles in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to What the Feminism podcast, and we hope you stay tuned.